The screen sharing working all right, and the tone quality okay as well?
Yes, perfect. And then you will have the 60 minutes, including 15 minutes Q&A session. And then please, I will like let you know, like a 40 minutes will pass. And also, please, let's get started your presentation.
Okay, good. So yeah, welcome everyone. It's really nice to be here. And first of all, apologies. It looks very dark in my study, but that is only because it's so very sunny outside that otherwise you wouldn't be able to see a thing. So what Viola and I want to do today is talk about corpus linguistics, mention digital humanities, especially look at the link between the two, and then work towards conclusions where we want to say a few words about the university infrastructure. So the overview for today is we do a super brief introduction to corpus linguistics. Then you get some examples from the Click web application. We'll talk about digital humanities. Then the examples you get will be from the Times Digital Archive, and then we look at the university infrastructure. So corpus linguistics is really kind of the data science of language study, because what we do in corpus linguistics is we like counting, because that is what we can use computers for. We like comparing data sets, and then in the next step we look at how can we display our results, how can we visualize what we found out, and how can we find out more while we are visualizing. A little example, and that is such a simple example, and I'm not doing a Zoom poll now to find out from you whether you know this text, but you probably all, if you look at this for a second, you'll all be able to spot this is Peter Rabbit, so that is a word cloud of Peter Rabbit, and everyone knows word clouds now. They are so frequent all over the shop. The idea is that yes, you count words and then you give words different colors and you make them bigger and smaller depending on how frequent they are. There's another way of looking at how frequent words are, and that is just doing a simple frequency list. And you see the difference right away, because in the word cloud, you've got Peter as this important word, but in your frequency list, you've got the definite article, and then the list continues with some function words before you get any names. And this has to do with what people behind word clouds do, what decisions they make as to which words are important or not. So for corpus linguistics, we like to think about functions of different words, and we like to start with raw frequencies and then think about implications of words in different groups, words with different functions. So these are different ways of looking at frequencies of words. Another way of looking at words and dealing with frequencies is a concordance. So what you see on the screen here is a sample concordance. This is for the word water, and that is taken from our Chillit corpus. That is a corpus of children's literature, mainly from the 19th century. What you get in a concordance is you have the word that you look for, so water, right at the center, and then you get some context on the left and on the right. And this is a way of reading a lot of texts at the same time, and not reading in the way that you would normally do from the beginning to end to get the story, but to see the patterns in which words occur. So patterns that you see here is in children's literature, very often people talk about water as a reference for place. Where do things happen? So things along by the water, or cultivated lands down by the water. There's an open space by the water. Another pattern that you find in children's literature is to fall into the water, or people have fallen into the water. And that's so typical in terms of the action that happens, children and their adventures, or animals and the adventures. And then, yeah, water and action is kind of synonymous. What we've got here is still a concordance, but this now isn't from children's fiction, but it's from newspaper articles. And then your concordance immediately helps you to find other meanings. And the word like water seems to be so straightforward, but you still find lots of different meanings. So if you look at water here, you see water cannons, and that is from protests when police had to come in. So this is already a bit older, this concordance. So this is when the Hong Kong protests were really in full swing. Or then people talk about water fountains, or people talk about a water park, and this is particularly because it's in the news, something bad happened. So there was a body found at a water park, and this is what people talk about, this particular place. There's a general pattern in newspaper articles that water and pollution and environmental damage very often occur together. So you talk about microplastics in water, contaminated water, then people try to do something about this by having a policy or fighting this water pollution. So you see how a concordance actually helps to narrow down the meaning of a word by presenting the word in its context of use. And that's important, actual language use. So not made up examples, but examples of the way in which people use the language. Okay, here's another example of what you can do with corpus linguistics, and that is a mixed method study that we've done together with a couple of colleagues, where we first analyzed a Twitter corpus, so tweets that people had sent to companies when they wanted to complain. But what we then did in the next step, after we analyzed the corpus, we ran an experiment. So we constructed our own fictional company. As you see, there isn't anyone with that name who sells you stuff yet, maybe in the future. But and then we made people fill in a form that tells us how they respond to the text that we've given them, so that we could actually put together our insights from the corpus together with observations on what people said about data. And that is quite important these days, to see the analysis of text and data not just as something isolated, but in combination with other methods. So to summarize this super brief introduction to corpus linguistics really just uses data sets, and this can be anything and everything, as long as it is in computer readable form. So you can have web data, social media, newspaper articles, any kind of language big data if you wish. What corpus linguists do is they develop methods, they develop software, web applications to support this reading at scale. But they don't just do this because they like playing around with tools. I mean, we obviously do, but we also want to find out about the language. We want to address language-related problems. And now I want to give you one example from our Click work, which is a web application. And that's really a resource that also illustrates how resources can change the way in which research communities operate. So Click, this web application at this year's The Landing Page, contains mainly 19th century fiction. Obviously, it would be nice to have contemporary fiction, but there's the tiny issue of copyright, which makes it difficult when people can then download everything and sell it in ways they shouldn't. So what we've got here is, with Click, you can run concordances, you can run clusters, you can do keywords. There's lots of things that you can do with it for the analysis of fiction. What is specific to Click compared to other standard corpus tools is that we've approached texts in quite an innovative way. So you can't just search text as a whole, but we also separate out different sections to study different discourse levels. So here what is highlighted in this light blue is everything that is within quotation marks. So that helps us to study the dialogue between fictional characters. We also then are able to study everything that is not within quotation marks. So that gives us a view on the narration. And within the narration, we can look at what we call suspension. So this is here set, the mild Miss talks, or returned Mrs. Chick, a little softened. This is interruptions of the speech of characters by the narrator. And this gives us quite interesting insights into the way fictional characters behave. Another thing that we've done with Click, and we were really keen to look at the user experience and the way in which you can use Click to really explore the text. So we introduced the quick grouping function. So that allows us to sort concordances, and not just by formal patterns alphabetically on the left and on the right, but users can, and you can see this here in the search for types box, users can put in words here like fixing, her, his, said, to see how, in this case, a concordance of eyes can be organized according to the pattern. So whether a lot of people fixing their eyes on other people. And this way you can support the reading of the concordance. Okay. A point that's really important to us, and we want to make it quite strongly in this presentation, is for a community to take on certain ways of working and actually benefit from resources. It is absolutely important to document what you do. And documentation is both something that happens internally within your research group and the university, and also externally. And Viola and I, we've now spent quite a bit of time looking at ways in which we can do internal documentation so that we can then communicate with the university's IT teams, and especially the BEAR team, on various things. So we are using GitLab now, and yeah, this works a bit like a wiki, and then you can put in to various sections what you do, put in links and all the rest of it. But in addition to the internal documentation, it's also really important to make sure that you share your code, that you share your ways of working, so that people can actually trust you and can check and can replicate what you're doing. So this is why we put a lot of what we do on GitHub, but we also then have additional information in our user guide. So that is a read the docs version, where we then explain what things actually do. And I think that is really quite important, because it can be rather annoying if you've got a Corpus tool and then you put some data in, you get some nice visualizations out, but you don't really know the detail of how things happen. So you can't follow up and test to understand what's going on. Now, I want to make some links to digital humanities, and that is something Viola and we really discuss quite a lot. How is what we do similar or different from digital humanities? And you could argue that Corpus Linguistics is kind of a way of digital humanities. Digital humanities is maybe the broader term, so it's about archiving data, it's about preserving data, it's making accessible things that would normally be, it's studying arts and humanities objects with digital methods, and it's also a lot about experiencing, so engaging in different ways. What we are particularly keen on in Corpus Linguistics is texts, or texts as one arts and humanities object of study. So, but it's really the focus in Corpus Linguistics. But if you think about it, there's also this link to data science, big data. A lot of big data is textual data. So you can see how disciplines, areas of study really come together. Here's just an example of some of the tools that people would probably consider more digital humanities rather than Corpus Linguistics, but there's a lot of overlap. So Voyant tools is something that is becoming increasingly popular, and they're doing a lot of things that are quite standard for Corpus Linguistics as well. So at the bottom right corner, you've got a concordance, then you immediately see the word cloud, you can get some graphs to get an idea of distributions. So the point we usually like to make is that it would be so helpful if people would just talk a little bit more to one another to see how there are similarities in tools and approaches, because if we are clearer about what others do and understand better where the similarities are, we maybe jointly can move forward together much quicker. Also, sometimes I like trawling the web to just see what other people do in terms of educational practices. And if you look at various degrees and things that happen out there, there's lots of basic Corpus Linguistics in data analytics courses, introductions. So here where people analyze co-occurrence and networks of words in Twitter data, and that is very similar to what people in Corpus Linguistics do when they look at collocation. So there's a lot to talk about and share. Now, moving to the example of the Times Digital Archive, this is something that you can get from our university catalog. So when you search, find it at Birmingham, for instance, you can get to the Times Digital Archive. And then what this does is you can see copies of the Times from the beginning of publication till very recently. And what you have is you have PDF versions of the images, or scanned versions of, so you've got images that you can look at, and then you can search words and they are highlighted in the image. And here, this is the search window that works quite well. And what you can now also get is you can get a transcribed version of the text. These plain text copies, they're probably a bit difficult to download still, and there might be a bulk download that you can get with the Gale Digital Scholars Lab, but we need to look further into this, how that's possible. However, what is really interesting is that in June 2014, so you will all know about this, this is just a reminder, really the UK government introduced reforms to copyright, and especially the text and data mining exception is really fundamental for things that we want to do in our discipline. So here, this exception says that researchers generally have access to any kind of copyright material for text and data mining purposes, as long as they already have access to the work. So this is the right to read. So if you can read it, like the Times Digital Archive, you then also have the right to do text and data mining on this. Interesting for us is that the university has a copy of the Times Digital Archive just on a hard drive. And we thought, okay, this is really exciting and we should be doing something with this. However, in practice, it can be quite hard work because from a university perspective, there are immediately various people involved. So we need to talk to library services. Obviously, the computing team in IT, the BEAR team are absolutely vital in all of this. And there's lots of interesting stuff that we can do if we really want to explore this right to read is the right to mine. And this is where I want to hand over to Viola, because she now can give you a couple of really nice examples for what we've been doing with the Times Digital Archive.
Okay, can everybody see my screen now? Is that coming through?
Fantastic, very good. Everyone else?
Okay, so this is one of the features in the online interface of the TDA that's called the term frequency, and it gives an overview of the number of documents in which a particular term is found across the years. So in this case, it's an example for surveillance. And alternatively to the raw number of documents, you can also obtain this data in terms of percentages of documents. But as we would normally like to go beyond this sort of functionality, we're also working with a full text, as Michaela has said. So the actual raw data available from a hard disk. So a couple of years ago, our team at the Center for Corpus Research processed the full text for, at that point, the years 1785 to 2008. So, you know, the resource, the TDA, is continually expanding, but that's what we've got processed so far. And that involved, for example, removing unnecessary XML tags, changing the data structure from one file per issue, so daily issue of the newspaper, to one file per article, which is then more useful if you want to sort of categorize different articles by the section of the newspaper and so on. And this initial processing of the raw data was done by our colleague Anthony Hennessy, and yeah, as a part of a project led by Michaela. And just to illustrate the processing, here's an extract of an original file as found on the hard drive. And as you can see, there are a lot of XML tags in there, and they contain lots of metadata that, for example, identify the article. And, you know, this is just an extract. There's more for the issue itself and so on. But on top of that, every single word in the main text is tagged, because when you search in the online interface, it will highlight the search term on the page. And so for that reason, it needs to be able to find their position. That's important for that purpose, not really for our analysis. So we wanted to retain some metadata, but we removed the more specific position tags, because obviously if you tag every word, that's very bulky. So the processing then led to something that looked more like this, where we've still got information about the title and paragraphs and the dates and so on, but we don't need those position tags, for example. And to provide a little example of how this data can be useful, I'll show you a little case study from my PhD thesis. And then in my thesis, I wanted to find out how the concept of surveillance was discussed in the Times in recent decades. I focused on the data after 1986, which is a bit of a weird year to choose, perhaps, but that's because in that year, there was a change. There is a change in the OCR quality. So data after 1986 is better, basically. More the quality of the recognized words is better. And it's also matched a good period for my study. And this was strongly supported by the research software group and Simon Brentford in particular from Advanced Research Computing, because it was quite a lot of data. And because we had all the individual articles, there was lots. And so it took, it would have taken a lot of time to do this, like on a laptop. So Simon helped to run lots of scripts in parallel, which allowed it to just take like a week when it would have taken a lot longer. And for this case study, I was working with monthly and yearly files to trace my topic over time. So this was the subset of the data that I work with. And in terms of corpus linguistics, this is quite a lot of data. So we always count in tokens, so in words, basically. So if you were to work with the full data set, that would give you even a lot more to work with, but you have to consider that the quality changes over time. To then narrow down these discourses, the topic I was looking at, I traced the use of the word surveillance over time among some other analyses that I did. And for this, I used a method that Michaela and I developed with Anthony Hennessy, and we called this Cooccurrence Comparisons. We've launched, or we've released that method in the Corpora Coco R package. And just to illustrate that a bit, essentially, if you have a corpus of texts, we can take this little paragraph as an example. We choose a word we are interested in, so for example, surveillance. And then we can look at what words occur together with that word in close proximity. And then when we look at that in many instances, we get a good idea of the context of that word in this set of texts. So we often look at 5 words to the left and 5 words to the right. And so, for example, here we have an occurrence of video. And if we do that many times, we might find that video is used a lot with surveillance in this context. But this idea of what is a lot is always a relative question. So for us, it's really important to compare data sets. So what the package does is it just runs a statistical significance test, the Fisher's exact test. So it won't compare one corpus, the co-occurrence counts in one corpus with another one, and then find out which words occur significantly more frequently with surveillance, or the word you're looking at, in one corpus compared to another. So I've run this for different to compare different years of the TDI, for example, and the output is a forest plot. So it visualizes the differences. So in this case, these words on the left, they occur significantly more frequently with surveillance in 1997. And these boxes indicate effect sizes. So the further they are away from the middle line, the bigger the difference is. When a pair does not have a box like these, that means it's unique in this data set compared to the other one. To be honest, they look quite weird for 1997. And if you then, for that reason, I went into the online interface to look at the context, and it turns out that advertising played quite a big role. So you've got these words that come from this particular advert actually, and adverts are repeated within a year, of course, so that can affect the data. 2008 was actually more interesting in terms of the culture, because here we find the word society as a unique collocate of surveillance. And that then, yeah, I was looking at some other examples, but it seemed that surveillance over time moved from this niche thing that happened in adverts and only a little bit in not the main section, moved into actually the center of attention in the 2000s and 2008 in particular. So looking at a concordance, as Michaela mentioned at the beginning, the concordance is a standard format in Corpus Linguistics, and we use that a lot to understand the patterns in the text. So in this case, the words I've italicized here, they express that sense that in 2008, Britain is described as sleepwalking into a surveillance society, becoming a surveillance society, or in fact already is one when you look at the use of the definite determiner, the surveillance society. And this is how we can move from the patterns in from a quantitative analysis back towards the context and understanding that, and then also looking at individual articles by referring to the scans. So we can then see that, for example, surveillance society, it's actually given an entire double spread here in May 2008, and in combination with the graphics, there's a lot of concern that you can see here. So there's a lot of potential to also work with the images, which we, by the way, also have on the hard drive. And we haven't done much with them yet, but we could. So we'd love to hear from you if you have ideas for that. Another thing that is quite interesting is the section. So we saw that, for example, adverts had quite an effect on the quantitative results. So we could look, to begin with, we can already look at which sections of the newspaper does a given term occur in more frequently, and that can change over time. So, for example, for surveillance in 1986, you see there's quite a bit of this light gray here, which means advertising. So there was a larger percentage of documents with surveillance that were actually adverts, whereas the news increases over time. So there's a lot we can do here as well. I actually did this bit manually through the interface, which was very time consuming, but we have categories in the metadata as well. So there's, again, potential to scale this up for larger analyses. Now, more recently, Michaela and I have worked on another case study. We were interested in textual differences between the initial paragraph and the non-initial paragraphs, or the body of newspaper text. So the red bit compared to the yellow. For this, we needed to have the various elements of the text split, and this data splitting was done by Mike Alloway and Simon Brentford of the research software group. So they helped us to separate files into different directories for the titles, and again, for the initial and non-initial data. And this is quite interesting because we now can compare the textual patterns between these sort of sub-data sets, subsets. One interesting thing that we found so far is that in initial paragraphs, the adjective fresh occurs significantly more frequently together with words like turmoil, criticism, fear, pressure. So these negative words. So you can see what I was saying earlier, when you search in the interface, it highlights where it occurs. So it's very small, but you can see fresh and turmoil highlighted here in the first paragraph of this article. And that does not only occur in sort of hard news, but also in sports, for example. So here we have fresh criticism. And this pattern is, of course, not exclusive to initial paragraphs. So we do still get some instances of fresh turmoil in the body of the text, as in this example, where it's clearly not the beginning. But overall, we find that it's more significant at the beginning, and these tendencies are really interesting. And then, because we're working with the full newspaper issue, we actually also find some interesting frequent patterns in the body of documents, such as Prince as a color kit. And this goes back to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So yeah, the TV program is part of the data in this case, and it actually has quite an effect because it's very repetitive. But we also find, for example, fresh mint. So quite a different sense of fresh when it comes to food or fresh produce. And here we find it as part of a recipe section, basically. So again, the influence of text type is quite interesting as well. In summary, and trying to work with and make sense of the data, we face a couple of challenges, of course, because this is quite sort of big data in terms of linguistics. So there are difficulties with the quality of OCR. We started out actually wanting to work with 19th century newspaper data to compare it with our literary data. And as you can imagine, the actual paper itself has sort of decomposed in places, or the printing quality in the 19th century wasn't the same. So of course the OCR won't be that great compared to something from 2008. Also, the recognition of the different categories, if something is an advert or a sports article or a recipe and whatever, or where boundaries are found between articles, is not 100% correct. So we have to work with that, because we can't just by hand recategorize everything. But we have to be aware that when we work with those automatic categories, there's there can be some problems with those. And due to the large size, doing anything to it, so analysis can take a while, and we have to work closely with IT. And then because it is a commercial product, there can be some issues with we cannot find as much documentation as we would like to have as a linguist. Like how was it categorized? What do you mean when you say these are the term frequencies? How did you count it? So there's challenges with the infrastructure, and also who is allowed to access it on campus, now that we're all remote anyway. Yeah, security with all this, because it's also an expensive data set. But of course, all of that also gives us opportunities. So this is a large full text data set that the university already owns. So it's there for us to do something with. Because we've got over 200 years of data, we can do lots of interesting diachronic analysis, time series research. As I mentioned, we've got images, so there's lots you could do with multimodal studies. And you can always reference the online interface for quick searching or finding examples. And of course, all of this is to say that there's huge potential for interdisciplinary collaboration. And yeah, I think we actually will have a lot of time for a discussion, but with that, I'd like to hand over to Michaela to finish up.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we just need the final slide, Viola. Ah, okay, fantastic, thank you. So you can see how all of this has been leading up to some questions to discuss for the university infrastructure. If you just look at how often we have mentioned people from the research software group, and you will have noticed how much we depend on university infrastructure. And infrastructure here isn't just kit and hardware. Infrastructure also is the people who can do things with the data and the programs and the hardware. So some points I really want to highlight here is the fact that there has been this change in law, and there is the right to read, is the right to mine. If we think about this in terms of university infrastructure, this is a massive, massive opportunity, and we really need to do something with this, because it isn't just the Times Digital Archive. If you look at how many other archives you can get access to, if you go to Find It at Birmingham, if you look at how many magazines, how many data set, and if the right to read is the right to mine applies to this, we really have to do something with this. You know, if we can look at this as a big, huge corpus where the question is just how do we access this and how do we our text and data mining on this, this is absolutely massive. This connects very much to the idea that I think a university also, oops, now the slide has gone, Viola. That can you share it again? Anyway, while Viola is sharing the slide again, this also connects to the idea that the university really should be a champion for open research. And open research, this idea that I hinted at previously with we are sharing our code, we are sharing information, there's documentation. The university can do a lot in this space by providing and supporting storage options, by making accessible tools, and also working on standards for documentation. Because something that Viola and I found a lot is across the university, we have got so many people who do fairly similar things already, but most of them all work in their own little silos. They make up their own way for how they share stuff, what they do with the code, where they document how they work together with people. And there's massive potential for us to do this better and draw on the expertise that we have. Also, universities can play a major role in addressing what sometimes can be a tension between open research and commercial interests of publishers and educational service providers. So we need to get to better understanding so that financial models for people in the educational world, they will not immediately collapse if you pay attention to open research. But there are ways in which we need to work together better, and we don't have time to go into this, unfortunately, but we had an ongoing long conversation about how, with the library and the experts in the library on copyright, how do you actually cite concordances in your published papers, and how much do you need to say about individual concordance lines when they come from the Guardian and from the Times. And also a while back we actually talked to people at the Guardian to see what they expected from us, and this is really quite complex and interesting. Once you've got the right things in the university infrastructure, there's so much you can do to pilot ideas for funding applications. And as I said before, working together with the research software group is absolutely vital in this, because in this way we can then also build capacity to host much larger scale projects and also support interdisciplinarity. And I'm wondering whether at this point I might already slip in an answer to this really good question that we got in the chat, where someone said, okay, I take your point about Corpus Linguistics and digital humanities being related, but aren't they ultimately still quite different because people have other goals? And I absolutely agree with you that if you look at the disciplines, you find it really rather difficult to see where the similarity is. If you look at the studies that people do and the way tools are presented. The argument we wanted to make here is it is absolutely worth looking for more similarities, because when you, especially when you do concordance reading, you will see it isn't just about trying to look at the word and looking at formal structures. You also want to get at the meaning. And in corpus linguistics, we've got this concept of meaning is really in the text. So text as a unit is important. And then you've got lots of overlaps with hermeneutics. And especially if you want to read some of the work that Wolfgang Teubert has done, that is quite an interesting approach to see what you can do with corpus linguistics in terms of getting meaning from text and trying to understand society and the world out there, which sounds very much like the things in the chat that were mentioned as this is what humanists want to do more, and that is not what corpus linguists do. Also, in linguistics, there are very many subdisciplines of linguistics anyway. And I think for people in data science, text and data mining, they tended to have gone to the more formal disciplines. So there's a lot about syntax and stuff like this. If you look at the literature in text and data mining and in NLP, it's absolutely amazing how they all immediately go to syntax stuff, and people are very fond of Chomsky and all the rest of this. However, there's also things like stylistics. If you look at stylistics, there's the idea that any one text is always a text, but it's also an example of language, and it basically does both. You read a text to get meaning out of the text, but the text is made up of words that you can describe in terms of linguistic categories. And to us, in the team that we are working, to us really the interesting bit is when you do it both together. Don't separate it out completely. Don't say there's language and then there are all the disciplines who use text to get meaning. Actually, this is two sides of the same coin. And what we are trying to argue is we need to know more of those two sides to together get to a better result. So this is why I'm saying this in point 5. If we do this text and data mining corpus linguistics working on the university infrastructure properly, we will naturally be able to support interdisciplinarity. You know, the Times Digital Archive isn't just there for people in linguistics. Other people, I know in the business school, look at the Times Digital Archive. There are other data sets that are used in different colleges. And if people would talk more about what they do with these data sets and how they could study them, there's massive potential to do something across disciplines. To be able to do this, it's really important that we always share best practice, going back to the standards again, so that things become replicable, shareable, and we understand what the others do. And then the final point we want to make here is, and especially now in this situation where we are, you know, this is a conference that we're doing via Zoom. This is something we normally would have done on the campus. Because of COVID, the world is upside down. In a sense, there's a massive digital disruption that is now, you know, going at speed and scale as we wouldn't have thought before. And while a lot of, obviously COVID, there's nothing good about COVID, but what we need to do with this digital disruption is we need to do something positive with this so that it doesn't all go pear-shaped, but really that we try and use this as a moment to think about what we can do in terms of developing new approaches to research and education and making use of the stuff that we have. Yeah, so there's so much we can use. We just need to think about how, and this is why it is, I think, really wonderful. Thank you for having us here in this particular conference, because I think everything the BEAR team does is so fundamental to this, and we need to do much more to discuss how we can do big things together. This is where we want to end, and I think we've got some time to discuss.
Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation with a clear message, Professor Mahlberg and Dr. Wiegand. For me, from outside of the humanity, it was very impressed how research in humanity uses text mining technology to see the patterns and the context of the particular word. So it's really a good. This presentation, this session is also a very good opportunity to have a discussion across the discipline. And so we got a question from from Augustine, and then let me read this one. And just like
that is the one question that I've already tried to dealt with in there, so I've done this.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a question from John as well?
Thank you for your presentation. Where do you see the future of corpus linguistics with a specific reference to replication? What can PhD students to get started in this best practice early on?
Oh, that's a super question. That is a really good question, because Viola and I only earlier this week had a discussion in terms of, so we're working also for the International Journal of Corpus Linguistics. And one of the things that is really important for replication is that when you publish your work, you make sure that you give people all the information that they need so that they're able to replicate what you've done. So that is, in some sense, writing a really good methods section, but also if there is more to the actual paper. So if you have produced code, if you have modified data, even if you have just tidied up a data set that looked differently before you started your PhD, and you've done something with the data so that you could get to your findings, you need to tell people what you have done. You need to make this shareable so that others can follow what you've done. And also something I find, so that is beyond the just sharing the data and sharing the code, something that is also really important. And John, obviously I'm not allowed into your coffee session for PhD students, I think, but also talking about what you actually do, sharing good practice with people. And yes, pre-registration is probably also something that will happen in our field, or should ideally happen. Yes.
If I can just add to that, it's difficult for PhD students, but if you already recognize that, you can early on have that conversation maybe with the library, so they have the copyrights team, because obviously you can't, like, I can't upload a copy of the TDA. It's a subscription product, but there's this sort of, you can find a sweet spot, like in my case, of course, my thesis includes examples from the TDA, so and there's this fair usage policy and so on, so you can get advice on that early on, and you can maybe not share your full data, but if you share the script, or you use some kind of repository to at least share those, then you can go some of the way to make it a little bit more open. And I think also hopefully now there's sort of more training for that than there was perhaps 5-7 years ago, but if you see any kind of training sessions, do attend them, and it won't be perfect, so raise your questions, and because this is all still sort of work in progress, and we're shaping the best practice in that sense.
Yeah, that is, can I underline this? I mean, PhD students, they will be important drivers of getting this right, because your work is always at the cutting edge, which is the definition of the PhD, and you are setting standards now, and it's about not being afraid to go and prod people, ask questions, find out what can be done so that you can do the right thing.
There is a follow-up. Yeah.
Well, that's Viola, that's probably more for you, the surveillance.
Yeah, just like we got another additional question from Augustine. If I understand you, in dealing with text using computer tools, the goal might be to arrive at explanation or interpretation, which is actually the goal of your research on surveillance as the search word.
Right. I'll just answer the question, hoping I understand it right. Give me feedback if that's what you wanted. So I was trying to analyze sort of the discourse of surveillance. So not just that word, but how is it as a topic being discussed. And we still don't have any perfect methods for that. Like, you know, you can do things like topic modeling or whatever, but so far there isn't any perfect solution for like, I want to know everything about surveillance or about starvation or something, and you know, give it to me. Like you don't have that method really. So we always have to sort of find workarounds or find the best. And in text mining, often that is identifying particular search terms, and not just one, but a range. So I didn't only look at surveillance, but I also looked at privacy, CCTV, sort of to look at particular technologies. And another way, so in one way I did that because I knew they were important words. But in other parts of my analysis, I also looked at what more bottom up, what are the frequent words, what is repeated, and that then informed later stages. So there are, yeah, like I said, there is no perfect way, but you can go at the problem from different sides, and yeah, almost as a form of triangulation, use both bottom up and top down methods of searching, and always go, because a lot of this analysis will be frequency based and quantitative, but we always have to go back to the text, to the page, and understand, you know, maybe a certain word just came up because there was a particular ad that showed up 10 times, but that doesn't mean that the whole world saw that ad in the Times newspaper, you know. So yeah, it's a balancing act. Did that help, or do you have any follow-up question on that?
Or I think Augustine like regard another okay, so there is to give the additional questions from Augustine. So is there any question? Like we already had a very exciting discussion, including just like how to, you know, how the methodology to what the goal of the research as well. So just like if there is no further question, maybe we can closing this session as well. Okay, so
hello. Hello. Yeah.
yeah,
I just want to commend Michela's remark on the need for the university to actually take all the BL software, advanced software team. They have been very helpful because I learned Python. I learned a lot of things in attending Python and R programming, as well as deep mining. But there's need for them to also, as Michela has said, to face the humanities too, and also find a way to assemble people who are already working in those areas so that they can be able to also understand and collaborate, as well as provide infrastructures. Because most of the other universities that are involved in digital humanities and other forms of things, which is interdisciplinary, as Michela has mentioned, and Viola, they are together, and they get a lot of support. I know Viola got support from some people with some things, but also it goes beyond just providing or helping to just resolve some issues or debugging some codes, but also giving some form of formal training and providing a kind of a place within the College of Art and Law, so that where we can also have our own experimentation with text and share ideas. So thank you very much.
Can I just, because your point is just really such a good point to make this again. It's, you know, it would be so wonderful if we could get to a stage where the help that individuals get on individual problems, where we could do a bit more about scaling this up. So, you know, if one person gets help on something, we then think across and say, oh, we found a solution to this. How is that similar to problems that other people have? And then we can reuse what we've done and we can scale it up. And it isn't just a single thing that we tick off a to-do list, but it builds towards a bigger project. That would just be wonderful. So, and there are such great people in the team now.
okay. we got another question. And would there be interest in the special interest groups? Okay, so just like it's just a kind of the suggestion. So I think we are running out the time for this session. So thank you very much, Professor Mahlberg and Dr. Wiegand, for such a very interesting and intensive discussion as well. And we are very glad to see, to have you, and yeah, hope both of you find something like helpful or just like enjoy this session as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.